When I was in my early teens, an event happened to me and my family that firmly made me a believer in the paranormal. It's something that terrified me and has always stuck with me. Now, I'm not here to convince anyone otherwise from what they believe. I'm just sharing my story and the experience I had. It happened when I was 14. I'm from the UK and my family had just moved into a new house. We'd moved locations for my dad's work purposes, and the house that we'd moved into was an old Victorian house. These types of houses were built in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The house itself was big and spacious and beautiful to look at. After we had moved in, it was nice to have a bigger bedroom and have some space from my younger brother. The first week went by quick. It was tiring sorting out all our belongings and my parents occupied with decorating. It was then it happened. One night I was home with my dad. My mother was out shopping with my brother at the time. I had been reading a book out back in the conservatory, and having finished, I decided to head upstairs to my room. Heading to my room, I had to walk through the rest of the house, as the layout was the conservatory out back, the hallway past the kitchen, then you would turn a corner to the stairs and living room. As I walked back, I passed the kitchen where I could hear the kettle boiling. Quickly glancing inside, I could see the cupboard was open and my dad inside probably looking for a mug. Continuing my journey, en route to my room, I turned the corner to head upstairs, and that's when I froze. As I looked into the living room, the TV was on, and sat in front of it, in his chair, was my dad. Confused, I looked at him as he stared back at me smiling. I looked back at the kitchen, thinking how did he get past me without me seeing? There was only one way to the living room from the kitchen. He could obviously see the startled look on my face as he asked if I was okay. So I asked him, how did he get from the kitchen so fast? He looked at me confused as he told me he hadn't been in the kitchen. Telling him I just saw him making a drink in the kitchen. He again looked at me weird, saying he hadn't made a drink. Then it hit me. If it wasn't my dad, and my mother and brother were out, then who was that standing in our kitchen boiling the kettle? Freaked, I ran back to the kitchen as I looked inside to find it was empty. The cupboard was closed and there was no sign of anyone. Calling my dad, he soon came to the kitchen. As I told him I swore I had just seen someone in the kitchen that I thought was him. Freaked out, I told him the kettle was boiling and someone was reaching for a mug in the cupboard. My dad, seeing how freaked out I was, looked around the house for any sign of an intruder, but there was no one. When we checked over the kitchen, the kettle was hot, proving my point it had just been boiled by someone. My dad brushing it off, telling me it could have held the heat from earlier that evening, and that if it wasn't me or him, then that must be the case as no one else turned it on. I didn't buy that. Convinced of what I saw, I was sure I had seen someone in our kitchen. But my dad assuring me that everywhere had been checked and there was no one else in the house. I began to question myself, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. Later that night, as I lay in bed, fast asleep, I awoke to the chilling sounds of someone screaming. As I shot up in my bed, my heart was racing. The sounds of the scream had woke me. I looked at the time and it had just gone 2 a.m. Hearing my dad's voice in the hallway shouting, asking if everything was okay as he ran from his room, shouting my mum's name. I soon followed him as I opened my door looking into the hallway to see my mum running up the stairs towards my dad and my brother peering out of his room looking scared. My mum looked white as a sheet, and as she tried to compose herself, what she said next terrified me. She said she had got up to go to the bathroom, and as she walked across the landing she could see a glow coming from downstairs. Curious as to what it was, she went to check it out. When she located the light, she could see that the glow was coming from the fridge that was wide open. Thinking one of us the culprit, and hadn't shut the door properly, she walked over to close it. But it's what happened next that terrified her. As she closed the fridge door, it was then she felt a breath down her neck, and as she looked to the side in the reflection of the window, she could see a man standing right behind her. That is when she turned, screaming to the sight of no one. There was no one in the room, but the figure she saw in the reflection was clear as day. My dad investigating again and found no sign of anyone. It was only us in the house. He suggested she had got up still half asleep and tired and her brain was just playing tricks on her. But knowing my mum, I had never seen her so shook up. After that night, as the days passed, things gradually got worse. My parents began to fight all the time. Strange things kept happening around the house. I would feel like I would see the figure of a man out the corner of my eye, and the whole atmosphere just felt wrong. Like we weren't the same happy family as we were. We were all unhappy and our mood had changed. Then, the final straw came one evening, when my mum caught my brother talking aloud on his own. When she asked him what he was doing, he said, "Talking to the man in grey." When she asked what man, his response sent a chill down her spine. "The man standing behind you," he told her. Hearing this, it hit her like a punch to the gut. She turned to see nothing, no one. But as she stared, she could feel it. An uncomfortable feeling. Like she was being watched. It was then she knew we were not alone. There was some kind of evil presence festering in the house, around our family. That night, my mum got her wish. She told my dad we needed to move and leave that house. And soon after, we were out of there, staying with family until we started renting somewhere new. After we left that house, it was like a dark cloud had been lifted. Our moods all of a sudden changed. We felt like our usual selves again, and the strange occurrences stopped. That confirmed it for me. I fully believe there was a negative force lingering in that house. From what I saw and felt and what I experienced, I know that that house contained a paranormal presence. I look back to that time of my life, and I know what I saw. And what we all felt was real, and whatever it was, did not want us there. When I was 23 years old, I worked in hospitality in a healthcare center, which consisted of a gym, spa area, restaurant and a child's daycare center, where parents could book their kids in whilst they enjoyed the rest of the facilities or were at work. The daycare center was the department I worked in. It was a decent-sized place and was 2 levels. It was kitted out with all you could need to entertain the kids, including a ball pit and slides, a games room with consoles for the older kids, and downstairs a sports hall with soccer goals and basketball hoops. My job consisted of checking in and out the children on the desk, supervising activities, setting up for special events along with adhering to safeguarding, making sure the children were in good, capable hands, and sometimes opening and closing the facilities. All in all, it was a tough job, with most of the time it just being myself and 2 other colleagues working. This happened to be one of the nights I was landed with closing the facilities. Usually it would be 2 of you left to close up, but after all the kids were gone and the majority of cleaning had been done, my colleague had to take off early as she had pre-arranged plans. I told her it was okay and I would finish it up. It wasn't too big of a deal as the main facilities of the gym and spa were still open, so there was a duty manager on site if I needed anything. As I was closing up, I was doing my safety checks and inspecting section by section. Firstly, I checked over the play area with the ball pit and slides, as that was first on my route. As I was finishing up in there, I locked up the doors, making my way to the games room, checking off the sheets as I walked in. It was then I heard the sound of one of the TVs echoing from the games room, as if one of the consoles had been left on. As I approached and walked up the steps, I was certain I could hear the TV, but as I reached the top step and entered through the door, the room was silent. All the TVs were off. Looking around, I checked all the screens and consoles as I was genuinely sure I had heard one of them on, but to my confusion, they were all switched off. I shrugged it off and continued with the rest of the checks. Feeling it had just been a long day and I was just tired, I shrugged it off and continued with the rest of the checks in that room before locking it up behind me. Making my way back down the stairs, I only had one last area to check, and that was to make my way down to the ground floor to where the sports hall was, making sure it had been tidied up by the other staff and that none of the toys had been left out down there. As I passed the desk, I rounded the gate and made my way to the stairs that led down to the sports hall. Halfway down, I stopped in my tracks, as again my ears pricked to the sound of something. I could hear what seemed to be the sound of a ball bouncing, like the sound you hear when a basketball is being bounced off the floor. Making my way down the rest of the stairs and reaching the bottom, I could still hear it coming from the sports hall. Was one of the kids or one of my colleagues still down here? It definitely couldn't have been one of the kids, as I watched them all leave and get collected by their parents, I thought. The overall duty manager would often come around and check over the facilities himself, so I thought maybe it was them. But as I approached the door, I could see through the glass panel on the door. The lights were off in the sports hall. But again I could hear the sound of a ball bouncing. Feeling curious now as to who was in there, I peered through the panel, but it was too dark to see anything in there. Opening the door, I reached for the light switch. As my hand brushed across the switch, the room lit up. Silence fell, and as I scanned the room, I could see it was empty. No sign of anyone and no sign of a ball on the court. Feeling uneasy now as I knew what I had heard. From the sound of the TV now to the sound of the ball, I couldn't be imagining it. As I stepped into the hall, I checked everywhere as quickly as I could, making sure there was no one there. But even though there was no one in sight, I couldn't help but feel on edge. The room was empty, but I didn't feel alone. My thoughts racing, I just wanted to get out of there and go. Heading back to the door, I reached for the light switch, turning it off behind me. But as I did, my blood ran cold. As the room fell to darkness, the sound of a ball began to echo around the room once again. Turning, I glared into the dark room as I stood in the doorway, and it was then I saw it. At the back of the room, under the glowing green light emitting from the sign above the fire exit, there was the silhouette of a small dark figure standing there. My heart racing, I fumbled for the light switch as my hand reached it, lighting up the room, my eyes fixed onto the spot where I saw the figure. To my disbelief, there was no one there. The room was empty and silent, the sound of the ball gone. My breathing heavy, I couldn't understand what I had just seen and heard. Trying to control my nerves and see reason, my trembling hand hovered over the light switch. As I debated turning it off, knowing I had to, I finally found the courage to switch off the light. But as soon as I did, I wished I didn't. As darkness fell, the figure appeared under the glowing green light, as the sound of the ball bouncing echoed around the room, as it got louder and more aggressive. Sounding so loud as it was getting closer to me. Screaming, I dropped the clipboard and keys into my hand as I sprinted away from the room as fast as I could, my legs like jelly as I climbed the stairs. Reaching the main door, I opened it, screaming as I was met with a figure. It was a collie, the site manager on duty that night. He looked at me startled and concerned, asking me if I was okay and what was wrong. I couldn't help but look behind me, but there was nothing there. I was shaking from head to toe. I'd never been so scared. After finally composing myself, I explained everything to him, and what I had seen. He looked shocked, but offered to check everything out. As he checked everything over, that night I waited. He found nothing at all, or nothing out of the ordinary. I followed him back down to the sports hall, as together we inspected, and with the lights off, nothing. No figure, no sound of a ball. After that night, I didn't stay in that job too much longer. A month at the most. It never felt right. There felt as if there was a presence there, and I know what I saw that night. This was a few years back now, and since I left, I have heard stories of other people working there experiencing similar things to what I did. Staff coming and going just like me, as they too experienced something paranormal. I don't know the history of the place or what may have happened there, but from my experience, I do believe supernatural forces, the paranormal, entities, whatever you want to call it, I do believe they exist. Thank you for joining us and watching this chilling video. We hope you enjoyed this topic and you found the fear within. What other subjects would you like to hear soon? Let us know in the comments what creeps you out. If you're new here, say hello, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Become a part of the Horror Motives world. See you soon with another terrifying video.